My son disappeared without a trace 6 years ago. Then I saw a man who looked just like him stocking shelves at the hardware store. I whispered his name before I realized I was shouting. He turned around slowly, and what I saw in his eyes destroyed me. I, 48M, never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this out somewhere before I lose my mind completely. 6 years ago, my son vanished without a trace. Today, I found him stocking shelves at a hardware store, and what happened next has shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My boy was 12 when he disappeared. One moment, he was playing in our backyard, the next he was gone. The police searched everywhere. Volunteers combed through forests and abandoned buildings. We put up flyers, hired private investigators, and spent our life savings chasing leads that went nowhere. My wife couldn't handle it and left me 2 years later, saying she needed to start fresh somewhere else. I stayed in our house, waiting, hoping, keeping his room exactly as he left it. The hardware store visit was supposed to be routine. I needed screws for a fence repair, something to keep my hands busy on another sleepless weekend. The place was nearly empty except for a few employees restocking shelves. That's when I saw him. He was taller now, obviously, with broader shoulders and the beginning of facial hair, but the way he moved was unmistakable. The same slight limp from when he broke his ankle at age 8. The same habit of tucking his hair behind his left ear when concentrating. My heart stopped. I whispered his name, barely audible, but somehow it came out as a shout that echoed through the entire store. He turned around slowly, and when our eyes met, I saw something that destroyed me completely. There was no recognition, no joy, no relief. Instead, there was pure terror. He dropped the box he was holding and backed away from me like I was a monster. When I stepped forward, he actually flinched. The manager appeared and asked if there was a problem. My son, because it was definitely him, despite what everyone would later try to tell me, looked at the manager with pleading eyes and said he didn't know who I was. I tried explaining to the manager who I was, showing him photos on my phone, but my son kept shaking his head, insisting his name was something completely different. The manager eventually asked me to leave, threatening to call security. I left my contact information and drove home in a daze. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look in his eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the kind of terror you see in someone who's been hurt badly and expects it to happen again. Someone had done something to my boy, something that made him afraid of his own father. I started watching the hardware store from my car during his shifts. I know how that sounds, but I needed to understand what had happened to him. After a week, I noticed he always left through the back exit and walked to a beat-up sedan driven by an older woman. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until I saw her clearly one afternoon. It was my sister-in-law, my wife's older sister. The one who had always resented me, who had tried to convince my wife not to marry me, who had disappeared from our lives around the same time my son vanished. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. She had taken him. Somehow, she had convinced him that I was dangerous, that she had rescued him from me. 6 years of believing my son was dead, or worse, and he had been living 20 miles away with someone who had stolen him from me. I confronted her the next day at her house. When she opened the door and saw me, her face went white. I told her I knew what she had done and demanded to know why. She tried to deny it at first, but when I mentioned seeing him at the hardware store, she broke down. She told me she had been watching our family for months before taking him. She claimed she was protecting him from me, that she had seen signs of abuse that no one else noticed. She insisted that my wife had confided in her about being afraid of me, about wanting to leave but being too scared. None of it was true. I had never laid a hand on either of them in anger. But she had convinced herself that she was saving him, and over the years, she had filled his head with stories about how dangerous I was, how I had hurt his mother, how she had barely managed to get him away from me in time. The worst part was learning that my wife had known. Not about the kidnapping initially, but she had figured it out about a year after leaving me. Instead of telling me, instead of bringing our son home, she had decided it was better this way. She thought he was safer with her sister than with me. I wanted to call the police immediately, but she begged me to wait. She said shocking him with the truth all at once could traumatize him further. She promised to start slowly revealing the truth, to help him remember who he really was. I gave her 1 week. Update 1. The week felt like a year. I drove past the hardware store every day just to catch glimpses of him. He looked healthy, which was something, but I could see the wariness in his posture, the way he constantly looked over his shoulder. She had made him afraid of shadows. When I returned to her house, she had my son with her. He looked terrified to see me again, positioning himself behind her like she was his shield. She had told him I was his biological father, but she had framed it as if she had rescued him from an abusive situation when he was younger. I asked him if he remembered anything from before, our dog, his favorite bedtime story, the treehouse we built together. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, But then he shook his head and said those memories belonged to someone else. She had done her job well. 6 years of lies had buried his real childhood so deep that even seeing me couldn't bring it back. But I wasn't giving up. I told them both that I wanted a relationship with him, that I understood he might not remember me, but I was still his father. My sister-in-law agreed to supervised visits, probably thinking she could control the narrative. During our first visit at a local park, I didn't push. I just talked about normal things, work, the weather, asked about his interests. He was polite but distant, like he was talking to a stranger he had been forced to meet. But then I mentioned that I still had his room exactly as he left it, and something changed in his expression. He asked what was in the room, and I described his baseball card collection, his model airplanes, the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. His face went pale. He said he sometimes had dreams about a room like that, but his aunt had told him they were nightmares from his bad time before she saved him. I realized then that she hadn't been able to completely erase his memories. She had just convinced him they were traumatic dreams. Update 2. I started bringing photo albums to our visits. Pictures of him as a baby, family vacations, birthday parties. Each photo seemed to crack something open in him. He would stare at them for long minutes, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and fear. The breakthrough came during our 4th visit. I showed him a picture of the two of us building his treehouse, both of us covered in sawdust and grinning. He stared at it for so long I thought he might be having some kind of episode. Then he looked up at me and asked why his aunt had told him his father was a bad man who hurt people. The question was like a knife to my chest, but it also gave me hope. He was starting to question her story. I told him that sometimes people do bad things because they think they're protecting someone, even when that person doesn't need protection. I said that the only way to know the truth was to remember for himself, not to let other people's fears decide what was real. That night, he called me. His aunt didn't know. He had snuck out to use a payphone. He said he had been having more dreams, but now he wasn't sure they were nightmares. He remembered me reading to him, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework. He remembered feeling safe and loved. But he also said he was scared. His aunt had been the only family he knew for 6 years. She had fed him, clothed him, taken care of him when he was sick. Even if she had lied to him, even if she had stolen him from me, she was still the person who had raised him through his teenage years. I understood his conflict, but I also knew I couldn't let her get away with what she had done. She had stolen 6 years of my son's life, and 6 years of mine. She had destroyed my marriage and made my child afraid of his own father. There had to be consequences. Update 3. I went to the police with everything I had. Photos proving he was my son, documentation of the kidnapping case that had never been solved, evidence that my sister-in-law had been living under a false identity with him for years. The detective assigned to the case was the same one who had worked on the original disappearance. He remembered me, remembered how the case had consumed him too. When I showed him the recent photos of my son, his hands actually shook. They arrested her that afternoon. My son was there when it happened, and watching the police take away the only mother figure he had known for 6 years broke something in both of us. He looked at me like I had betrayed him, like I was the monster she had always said I was. The next few weeks were hell. He was placed in temporary foster care while the courts sorted everything out. He wouldn't see me, wouldn't take my calls. The social worker said he felt like his entire world had been a lie, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. My ex-wife finally came forward when she heard about the arrest. She admitted she had known where our son was for the past 5 years, but had convinced herself he was better off away from me. She claimed she had been planning to tell me eventually, but it had turned into never. The betrayal from her hurt almost as much as losing him in the first place. She had let me suffer for years, had let me believe our child might be dead, because she had decided I wasn't worthy of being his father. During the trial, everything came out. How my sister-in-law had been planning the kidnapping for months. How she had convinced my son that I was dangerous. How she had systematically erased his memories and replaced them with fear. The judge called it one of the most calculated cases of parental alienation he had ever seen. She was sentenced to 15 years for kidnapping and child abuse. My ex-wife faced charges too for her role in concealing the crime. Watching them both in handcuffs should have felt like justice, but mostly it just felt empty. My son, now 18 and legally an adult, had to decide for himself what he wanted. The years of lies had done their damage. Even with therapy, even with all the evidence of who he really was, part of him still believed he was safer without me. He agreed to see me one last time before making his decision. We met at the same park where we had started rebuilding our relationship. He looked older than his years, worn down by the weight of learning that his entire adolescence had been built on a lie. He told me he remembered everything now, the real memories, not the nightmares she had convinced him they were. He remembered being happy with me, remembered feeling loved and safe. But he also said that 6 years of fear couldn't be undone overnight. He said he needed time, maybe years, to figure out who he really was without her voice in his head telling him what to think. He wanted to try having a relationship with me, but slowly, carefully, like strangers learning to trust each other. It wasn't the reunion I had dreamed of for 6 years, but it was a beginning. As I watched him walk away, I realized that revenge had been hollow. Getting justice for what was done to us didn't give us back the years we lost. It didn't undo the damage to his mind or heal the scars on both our hearts. But it did give us a chance to start over, to build something new from the wreckage of what was stolen from us. And sometimes, when you've lost everything, a chance is enough. The woman who took my son destroyed our family, but she couldn't destroy the love between a father and his child. That survived everything she threw at it, buried but not broken. Now we're digging it up together, one careful conversation at a time. Some kinds of revenge aren't about punishment. Sometimes they're about reclaiming what was taken from you and refusing to let the people who hurt you win. My son and I are still here, still fighting to find our way back to each other. That's the only victory that matters now.